Mr. Chairman,
I move the...
Mr. Chairman,
I'm going to move the Honourable David Cunliffe.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, it is an outrage, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, however, what we are seeing in this committee stage debate, for the public out there, this is the part of the debate where we go through the bills clause by clause and we dig down into the detail. And I just want to recognise the contributions that some of my colleagues have made. Trevor Mallard rightly pointing out that this bill is not even necessary, that the government has a thing called a regulation-making power in the main act. It doesn't need to pass this amendment. It can do this by a cabinet decision, order in council in January. So why are we here? We are doing this simply and only because the government wanted to be able to claim a wafer-thin surplus in the budget. This is a political tool because this is one of the House of Cards which is propping up that wafer-thin line. And without this one, without the 600 million extra tax that they're magicking in that year, without the 1.1 billion corporate tax, the 400 million tax receipts, without all that other shonky, funny money manipulations of the budget documents, none of that would have got there if they hadn't put this petrol tax rise in as well. And I want to acknowledge my colleague Phil Twyford, who's quite rightly gone through the list of some of those roads of national significance and made the crystal clear point that they just don't stack up on the traditional benefit-cost ratio. The Holiday Highway has got a BCR which is about 1.0. That means they get $1 back at best for every dollar they put in, and that is a complete waste of money. It would be so much better to cut that back to about the 300 million, not the 1.2 billion, and spend the 800 difference on getting that city rail loop in Auckland, so that Britomart wasn't a one-way street you have to back the trains out of after you've put them. We could actually run them round in a circle and have a decent commuter system, which would make the whole Auckland rail network more efficient. The government could do that in partnership with Auckland Council if they could discover the meaning of that word. And what about the Kapiti Expressway? I see we've got my colleague Chris Farfoy from Mana here has led the charge on that issue. Not even the locals want it. The government's spending hundreds of millions of dollars that it doesn't need to spend because it could simply improve the existing arterial road. It's cheaper, it's what the locals want. It is nearly as bad as Transmission Gully, says Mr Mallard. So who would disagree? Who would disagree? So my colleagues are almost unanimous on this point. Almost unanimous. So we'll leave it to the Deputy Leader to sort out the Wellington colleagues on that matter. And I want to come back to the point that my excellent colleague Ian Lees-Galloway has made too, about the unaffordable tax grab that this is part of. This is what they call trickle-up economics, right? The money's trickling up from every Kiwi family to the government's coffers. Trickling up, not trickling down, because they're taking from the many and giving to the few. And as Ian has pointed out, Mr Lees-Galloway has pointed out, the reason that the government's in this predicament is one of the first things they did when they came in was to reward their rich mates by giving unaffordable tax cuts. 40% of the money went to the top 10% of income earners. 40% went to the top 10%. It was ridiculous, Mr Speaker. They enriched the rich and they impoverished the poor. And worse, they created $1 billion fiscal hole which these tax increases are having to make up for. Mr Speaker, in my earlier contributions in the first and second readings, I went through in more detail the other cards that are required to prop up this bogus surplus in this budget, and they're extensive. It's the cuts of new operating spending in 2014. It's the artificial tax flows. It's the fact that they haven't declared the cost of the R&D tax credits. It's probably a couple of $100 million in that. Mr Speaker, you're drawing me back to the substance of this part of the bill, Part 1, quite rightly, sir. But it is gobsmacking, sir, that we are here raising everybody's petrol prices by 9 cents a litre in a bill we don't need to be here for, because the government, even if you agreed with the idea, they've already got the power to do it. So why are we here in a parallel universe? According to our clock, it's still Thursday. For everybody else, it's a Saturday. Why are we here to pass a bill that doesn't need to be passed? The answer is only to make the budget look like it balances. It doesn't anyway. But if anybody out there in New Zealand wanted proof positive that this whole government's budget is a complete sham. This is it. We're here in the weekend passing a bill which is not legally needed to put up your petrol taxes.
Calling Tracy Martin.
Thank you very much for the call. I rise to speak predominantly around